I'm going to start by saying that it's not unfair that players in the English Women's Super League are paid less than male players in the English Premier League. However, this statement does need to be qualified. We can also say that it's not unfair that female fashion models are paid more than male models. Let me explain. I think it's really important to start by acknowledging that there is a gender pay gap in the UK. Official statistics from the ONS show that in 2022, average hourly earnings for men were 15% higher than for women. However, the gap is getting smaller and has been consistently falling over the past 15 years. It was over 27% in 1997. Of course, it's against the law not to pay people the same for doing the same job. However, the pay gap is largely explained by less women in highly paid roles, which is still a situation that can definitely be improved on. So there remains a general issue of fairness in terms of a gender pay gap. However, football isn't a normal labour market. The situation in football is very different than the normal job market. Here are estimates of the average annual salaries of the national men's versus women's teams. These are the elite players who play for their country. The women's pay looks totally insignificant compared to what the men are paid. The men in the Brazilian team are paid an average of $10.8 million per year. Even in the Australia team, they're paid $570,000 per year. The highest women are the England women, who are on $363,000 per year. The Argentina women are only on $4,200 per year. There is a massive pay gap in football, but there's a good economic reason that explains at least a good portion of that difference. Football is a big money business and the best players have a lot of bargaining power. Signing the best players potentially earns a football club a lot of money, not just in terms of increasing the chance of winning business, but also in sponsorship deals, merchandising, etc. So it's simple. The salaries in the men's game are determined by the market, and as with the film industry or music business, those at the top of the game get very, very rich. From a business perspective, the women's game is nowhere near as profitable as the men's game, so it is this that determines what the pay levels will be. It's not unfair that women are paid less from this point of view. In fact, if somehow you were able to force football clubs to pay women and men exactly the same, it would probably be the end of women's football because the cost would be prohibitive. We live in a market system and you can't buck the market. This phenomenon does work the other way round in the fashion industry. Taking data for 2013, which seems to be the last year that comparable data is readily available, we can see that the top 10 women models were all paid more than the top 10 men. No one would argue that this is unfair. The female models are commercially more valuable, and therefore companies are prepared to pay higher fees to them. There is one thing that's really important to note here, that the women's game started with a big disadvantage. Women's football had some profile at the start of the last century, but was banned by the Football Association in 1921. In its decision, the FA said, "The game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged." The ban lasted for 50 years and incredibly was only lifted in 1971. No one could argue that this ban was fair. Who knows where women's football might have been had it developed alongside the men's game. What we can say is that the women's game is now going from strength to strength. We currently have a World Cup in Australia that's the most popular yet in terms of attendances at the games and global coverage on major TV stations. And we can make two comments about the pay of the players in the English women's team. Firstly, looking at the women's pay alone, we can see that the English women are actually quite well paid. In fact, they're by far the best paid in the world. The average pay is $363,000 per annum. The reason for this is that the women's game benefits from the brands of the English football clubs. The women's teams share in the culture, the history, the fan base, and the popularity of the English women's games is massively increasing. The second point is that playing for England, the men and women do earn the same in match fees, about £2,000 per game. Now, I'm not sure whether this applies in many other countries, but I do know that it does in the case of the US. This seems fair to me because representing the country is not just a commercial transaction. I'm certain that it wouldn't break the law to pay the women less, but this does seem like a decent thing to do on the part of the Football Association. As a final point, I do think it's important that the male-dominated football associations support the development of the women's game. English football is by far the most successful in the world in terms of revenue, and it does seem fair that some of the money goes into promoting the women's sport. I think this is happening more and more, and we're now at a turning point where the women's game is becoming much bigger. So it's not unfair that the men earn a lot more because of the commercial value of what they do. But it is fair that every effort is put into helping the women's game to develop, and over time the pay gap is likely to increase. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.